Let's say I had this really, really violent upbringing. I go out and start dating as an adult, and I meet a guy who's like a little bit manipulative, kind of gaslights me every now and then. It's like, that's not so bad because he's not swinging a bat at me.
Wow.
Right? A mind warp.
Yeah.
That's why I really, really try to encourage people to just continually practice self-awareness on the body level. Like, keep checking in with yourself, because it's the only way to stay with what feels authentic. So the third prong of attack is...
Hello, and welcome to another amazing episode of TMC, where we are here to help you take your relationships from surviving to thriving. If this is your first time joining us on TMC, go ahead and subscribe. Click the like button, turn on your notifications so you will be notified every week when we upload a video. Today on TMC, we have a very special guest, Miss Nischa Phair with Thriving After Trauma.
I'm from Toronto. I am single currently. I was divorced about 5 years ago. I'm a trauma-informed pleasure educator and have been an embodiment somatic coach for about 14 years. And I'm also a researcher, and I just released my first book.
Really? What's the name of the book?
The book is called Fawn, When No Looks Like Yes. And it's all about exploring the nature of nervous system responses and how they show up in intimate relationships. So my goal with the book is really to start to dismantle toxic dating culture, because we've had enough. Mm-hmm. It needs to go.
That's an awesome road to lead down. So what are some of the main things that your book focuses on to help others with that?
So the book largely focuses on what's called a fawn response. And the fawn response is one of our body's natural stress responses. It's hundreds of thousands of years. It's been around. Mammals use it. We see it across different species. So it's biological. It's a biological stress response, but in our current modern day reality, it looks like intimidation and submission. So what's interesting about this particular stress response, as opposed to some of our others, is that it's uniquely social and it's uniquely hierarchical. So I don't fawn at like a falling tree branch or an oncoming car. I'm going to fawn at someone or with someone who has more perceived social power or physical strength than me. So it's a stress response that we use to kind of get something over with, or to make someone like us, or to avoid harm in some way. And what's interesting about the way it plays out in relationships is that we have these inherent hierarchies because we live in this really wonderful, toxic, patriarchal, oppressive society.
Right.
Wow.
So between men and women, it's a response that causes us to abandon ourselves, to run away from our authenticity, and to try and kind of futz our way through a really difficult situation just to get to the end of it. We see it in dating situations, in intimate sexual situations. If someone, pushes too far. I see it a lot with clients when, one partner wants to try some other sexual act, perhaps, that the other partner isn't interested in, but they do it anyways because they want to save the relationship, or because they have 3 kids and they can't afford to disrupt the family culture in that way. The basis of this book is really looking at how this stress response really eats away at the fabric of nourishing relationships.
So is it something similar to accommodating? Like, I really don't want to do it, but want to do it anyway?
People pleasing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. Fawning might look like people pleasing. It could look like shutting down, feeling like you've lost your voice.
Right.
What's interesting about these stress responses, no matter what kind of body you're in, what your gender or sexual orientation is, we can mix and match them. So I can be a little bit fighty and flighty, and I can be a little bit fawny and shutting down. And while there are certain biological predispositions we have, depending on our upbringing,
sometimes I'm confused because I'm not a professional. I see people get into relationships they know they shouldn't be in. based on their history, based on their past. Could you give us like examples of what this looked like so the listeners can begin to identify themselves in this situation?
So one of the body level effects of the response is that it inhibits our awareness of ourselves, of our boundaries, of other people. So it's like our own bodies are sabotaging us, right? So it's crazy. So you have that component, number one, the body level. So we're kind of like dipping into the red flag territory. And the reason we can't see red flags, all that, is really three-pronged. So one, it's the biological factor, the fact that this stress response is inhibiting our ability to be aware of ourselves and our surroundings. Two is our upbringing. So if I was raised in a home, which I was, a very turbulent and unhealthy home, everything that I'm seeing is normalized for me. So if I'm seeing gaslighting, if I'm seeing emotional unavailability, if I'm seeing criticism and people being unhealthy and cruel to one another, while I may know it's not right, and it's not something that I want, my body, my nervous system, my organ system, the way I process information cognitively, all of that information is normalized to me in my reality. Now, it gets even more complicated if, like, let's say I had this really, really violent upbringing. I go out and start dating as an adult, and I meet a guy who's like a little bit manipulative, kind of gaslights me every now and then. It's like, that's not so bad because he's not swinging a bat at me.
Wow.
Right? A mind warp.
Yeah.
So why I really, really try to encourage people to just continually practice self-awareness on the body level, like keep checking in with yourself, because it's the only way to stay with what feels authentic. So the third prong of attack is our social conditioning. Depending on your religious background, your gender, your race, your political affiliations, all of these kind of social constructs, we're going to have different stories for what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine, what it means to be straight, what your sexuality is supposed to be, right? So all of these kind of narratives and sociosexual scripts force us to play out what I call the patriarchy pantomime, right? So we're all just playing these little roles in this really messed up production. And so one of the big pieces for a lot of folks is that they may be told from a really young age to second guess their instinct. I don't think we do it as much today, but when I was growing up in the 80s, there was a lot of like, oh, that's not a big deal, or don't worry about that, you know, but I feel, oh, you know, you're just overreacting. We teach kids to ignore their instincts and their intuition, and then we wonder why they're struggling when they grow up. There's one more biological piece that's really like kind of illuminating, but it's an invitation for us to be more than our biology, really, I think, is when we're all going through puberty, around 7 or 8, little girls get this surge of estrogen, and it makes them more emotionally intelligent. It makes them more self-aware. It makes them more aware of their surroundings and their place in the world, but it also makes them less confident in themselves. So they start second guessing themselves. Because social media is everywhere, they're also saying my hair isn't the right way. You know, my clothes aren't the right way. My body isn't the right way. At the same time, the influx or the increase in testosterone in little boys is making them start to choose more risk-taking behavior and more pushing boundary type behavior. And this is biology. Like, we can't control this. This is how we've evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, but it's the fact. And I think when we can start to understand the ways in which our bodies are really kind of throwing a real monkey wrench into the works in terms of how we relate to one another, we can start to really say, all right, so my body is making me want to just impose and push through that person's boundaries, even though I don't actually want to. So how can I maybe check in with myself, ground myself, pull back, and make more space for them to be and breathe and have their own experience?
I wanted you, Nischa, to share some of your story because there's a reason you have this passion. You're a researcher and you're a trauma-informed sex educator. You have this passion for a reason. So I wanted you to share some of your story that tell us the journey that what led to you.
Where does passion come from?
Exactly.
Absolutely. That's good.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very toxic, very abusive family home. And so, you know, I'm a very spiritual person, and I came out spiritual. Like, I was really connected to the divine, and not through religion or anything. I just really felt, and I remember feeling that soulful connection to myself and to something greater as a young child.
Yeah.
So this kind of drive to course correct this trip that we're on has been there for a long time. And it came from growing up in around unhealthy relationship dynamics. I got out of an abusive marriage in 2014. And there was, in addition to the abusive components, there was also a lot of betrayal. So he had 3 emotional affairs that I am aware of, and possibly some physical ones as well. And I see what caused it and where it came from. Like I can see his background and I can see his pain and his wounding. And it's not okay. It's not up for me to heal it or carry it or solve it for him.
Right.
But I can see that we're all just acting out of our wounds, right? And our conditioning.
Yeah.
So I really do see and I feel, the light and the source, the spirit, whatever word resonates with folks in all of us. And it's the thing that connects all of us. And when we don't heal our wounds and we don't invite ourselves to be more than our conditioning, then we are not acting out of our spiritual selves, we're acting out of our pain. So how I got to where I am now was really through healing that abusive relationship. And I ended it in 2014. So at the end of the relationship, I wasn't able to touch myself. Sex, the whole idea of it terrified me. I believed that I was asexual, that the relationship had made me asexual. Prior to that, I'd had a very healthy sex life, felt really empowered as a sexual being. And so ending that relationship and having that such stark difference between those 2 experiences, I knew that if I didn't heal that component, that I would never be able to have the kind of relationship that I know that I'm destined for, right? That I know I'm meant to contribute to, as well as experience with, a partner. And so that really, I initially started going down, just trying to do my own healing. And in that process, I learned a lot about the nature of pleasure, how it connects to our attachment wounds, how we can make this kind of work more trauma informed for people, more accepting of people of different backgrounds, folks with neurodiversity, or people who identify as being highly sensitive. And so my work now, I aim to try and create something that's supportive to folks like me, folks who've had a harder time, who maybe are a little bit more sensitive. There's this belief that people who are sensitive, or people who are survivors, people who've experienced any kind of abuse, are broken, and you can't be in a sexual relationship with them. Or people who identify with having those kind of identities have to accept less than their worth. They have to settle because no one's going to want them. So I really push back hard against that, because it's not true. And there's so much, I think, when you've come through something like that, either an abusive relationship or sexual abuse or any kind of assault, it's not easy. And I'm not going to, sit here and put this big shiny silver lining on it, but there is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, in that we can stand from vantage points that other people can't. And I now know things about the nature of humanity and relationships that make me like such a strong force in terms of what I can bring to a relationship, right? Because I've had to become aware of these things. And they're things that, most people don't get a chance to look at because they don't need to, because they haven't had that injury or that wound. Mad thing about trauma is that sometimes we have to reenact those unhealthy relationships in order to kind of like dig the thorns out and actually heal, right? That's part of how we process and how our bodies remember, is by going through it again. Now, for folks who get into like abusive relationship after abusive relationship after abusive relationship, I think that one practice that I really try to encourage my clients, and something that's been really supportive to me, is the practice of intentional celibacy. So when you've been having unhealthy relationships back to back, or you're kind of keep tripping over the same crack in the sidewalk, I really see this process of intentional celibacy as a kind of like going back, and what would you have given yourself at 16 or 18? How would you have talked to yourself? What kind of information, what books would you have have helped your 18-year-old self read, you know? And so it's a really like self-loving practice of getting to strip away all of the like really, really horrible narratives.
Yeah.
Because the other piece with social media, and especially in the last 5 or 10 years, there's a lot of sexual perfectionism going on. People thinking that they need to do all of the sex acts and they need to have all of the lingerie. They need to look a certain way in order to be acceptable as a human being, right? And so, yeah, I think that would probably be the practice I'd recommend for folks who are just kind of, like I said, tripping over the same crack in the sidewalk, is to just take a pause, peace out, and love yourself, love your sexuality for a while on your own.
You mentioned the celibacy. So let's talk about this. What are just a few, maybe 1 or 2 other practical steps to recovering from a toxic relationship or recovering from a series of toxic relationships?
Yeah. 2 things would be movement and nature. Kind of, I mean, everyone has different types of movement that they like get involved in, whether it's like running, walking, yoga, what have you, but anything where you can get into your body and remind yourself of your own agency, that you do have power, that you do have flexibility, that you can move whenever, however you want to, that you're not under someone's thumb. You know, the beauty of movement is that it proves to every single one of our 70 trillion cells that we're not stuck, that the bad thing isn't happening, and that we're in charge. And those 3 things are like those embodied beliefs. If we can keep reinforcing those and keep recalibrating our bodies with those beliefs, I mean, we can do anything. They're so important. And so that would be one, movement. And then the other one, again, nature. We are of this earth, that we're not just these meat suits with phones running around buying stuff, that we actually don't need that new car or that new, you know, I don't know, t-shirt or whatever. That we are enough on our own, and that the earth has our back always. The earth is our greatest supporter.
You said to be self-aware of your body levels and check in with your body. Let's talk a little bit about that, because how does one do that? What does that look like?
Yes. So the practice that I work with my clients is what I call the practice of reorienting to somatic comfort. So anytime we feel agitated, we feel a sense of urgency in our bodies, that's a sign that your nervous system has been triggered. So if you feel any of those little flutters or this, we also have certain thought processes that will tell us that we're in an activated state, like I have to do this, or this isn't happening fast enough, or these kind of really driving, I'm not good enough. Angry, really mean voices, those are the voices of an activated nervous system. So the idea of checking in really is a practice that I encourage people to do, just like every hour on the hour, set an alarm on your phone or a reminder, stop and just notice, look out a window. What do you see? Take a drink of water, be with your body, maybe put your hand on your belly and breathe for a minute. And I don't, you know, you don't have to meditate. You don't have to, you know, have any kind of fancy practice. It's just a matter of coming home to your body for a minute, pausing. And, you know, the beauty of that kind of practice, it's so simple. It really helps to build self-trust.
It's like, what is going on in our mind? What is going on to cause us to do these things? It cause us to go into bad relationships. It cause us to eat things we shouldn't be eating. To cause us to stay on social media. What's making us do this? And video games, even to add to that, what's making us do this? And then what are some things we can begin to do about it today?
Yes. How much time do we have? Totally building on everything that we've been talking about so far. And we know now that social media and video games have been designed to be addictive. They hire behavioral scientists, they hire addiction researchers, they hire psychologists and neuroscientists to try and make these things more addictive. And they're literally programming our nervous systems at the body level. Our nervous systems are being reprogrammed by Mark Zuckerberg every single time we go on Facebook. You know, you want to talk about hierarchical stress. A lot of people don't think about it this way, but I've really come to that social media is another form of hierarchical stress. We are not in control of it. It is overpowering us.
Absolutely.
In the way that we now communicate with one another. You go on the feed and everyone's yelling and screaming and having arguments, and it's triggering. I can't go on it anymore because it's just disrupt my peace. So I think part of it is the biological, that neurophysical dopamine delivery device piece. The other piece is that the ramping up of our nervous systems through this device on top of what's happening in the world is making us more like we're carrying more traumatic stress. So when we're carrying traumatic stress, we make really poor decisions. We aren't able to care for ourselves. We can't communicate well with our partners. We can't be open to pleasure. We can't emotionally regulate with ourselves, with others. It's hard for us to pick up on body language cues. And I think there's this other piece where we're so pleasure starved that we're just looking to feel good wherever we can, whether it's with food or whether it's with people who aren't like going to be good for us. We're aching for it. We're aching to just feel like things are okay for like a minute, right? And so I think it's indicative of the time of life that we're in, where the past, it's not just the past 5 years. I think really the past 20 years has really just escalated so quickly in terms of how our ways of life have changed. And if we're not careful, if we don't look ahead and say, where are we going to be in 50 years? What is our humanity going to be? We really need to start implementing these changes now. And in terms of how to change that up and choose different choices, I really rely on nature so heavily, even if it's just like looking at a plant. Like I have my little plant here. Having something green by you. I know like forests and being able to actually take time away to get out in nature isn't accessible for everybody, but just going and standing under a tree and being quiet with the earth, the same way dolphins and dogs and all the other beings on this planet that we share it with. And we forget that. There's a beauty to remembering our origins, right? That we are all just human animals trying to feel good and get along in the world. So nature's a big one. And then that other one that I mentioned about reorienting to somatic comfort. And, you might find it with a warm cup of tea on a hot day, smelling your coffee in the morning for an extra few minutes, taking a nice warm bath, just these things that feel really deeply nourishing to us. Because when we do insert more of these opportunities into these moments into our lives, we're not just nourishing our bodies, we're nourishing our hearts. And we're nourishing our souls. Being in that moment, whether you're in this beautiful forest or you're watching a sunset or you're like in a really delicious moment with your partner where you're so in the present moment and everything else has fallen away, there's nothing wrong with the world in that moment.
Just listening, and what I hear you saying is, if we feed and are self-aware of the things that naturally in the world and in nature and as far as who we are that bring us pleasure, then we won't be seeking that pleasure in all of these other toxic things outside of us, such as toxic relationships or social media or all of that. And you just talked about some simple things like, if you love the smell of coffee, smell it a little bit longer. If you love nature, you love outside, get up and move. And it's basically, to me, what I hear you're saying is getting back to the humanness of us and taking away all of the things that our lives have been crowded with, all the devices and all the entertainment that is thus killing the soul. And then we're seeking this fulfillment that's never going to come because we're starving from that natural pleasure.
And when if you take a dolphin out of the water, that dolphin will die because it's out of its environment. And what's happening here, we are, we're creatures of the earth, and all the social media, the television, all this technology, to me, it reminds me of, and people make jokes of things like that when you watch these movies and you see the machine taking over the human, like the Terminator. We've been terminated by our technology. I mean, it's killing us. It's taking our lives, and it's happening right before our eyes. And whatever his name was in the movie. O'Connor. He's trying to fight. And here you are. I put you in O'Connor's shoes. I mean, you're trying to send the message that people are starving for something and they're not getting it. They're not getting the natural pleasures. So now they're pleasurizing themselves in relationships they shouldn't be in, and food they shouldn't be eating, and social media that they shouldn't be on all the time. And social media is raising parents and their kids. I mean, this stuff is destroying us. And I see the disgust on your face on how much it upset you
Yeah.
and how much, I mean, you're trying to get
Thank
this
you.
point. I see your passion. I see your passion is really trying to get this point out. I mean, I don't know if you were trying to hide it, but I can see it. I can see the disgust because you know exactly what's going on. You know exactly what Facebook, you know exactly what Instagram, and you did your research and you know what they are doing to us. And you're trying to, you're blowing the horn saying, hey, wake up, wake up, wake up, self-awareness. Yeah, so I'm really thankful for what you're doing and sharing that.
Thank you for seeing that. That means a lot to me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every situation has its own set of rules, and every situation is different. Because I come from abusive household, and I remember as a teenager, I was really, because we got married. I was 20 years old. She was 19.
Oh, no way.
And yes, and we
that's awesome.
It'll be 24 years this year. 24 years.
Congratulations.
Now, thank you. Thank you. What's so amazing about it is I remember because my mom passed when I was 16. And when my mom passed, I mean, I walked around, I felt unloved. That's the story that was in my head. Nobody loved me. And I act on it. I mean, I started doing drugs and things like that based on how I felt. And when we got into a relationship, because of my situation, what it did for me, me dating her it was the best thing ever happened in my life because it changed the trajectory of the direction I was going. But my situation does not fit every circumstance. I mean, I knew within my gut, I said, I have to, this woman is changing me. This woman, she's giving me something I didn't have. And in return, I began to reciprocate the same thing. Right. And so it worked that way for us. And I really want the TMC listeners to listen. Go with your gut. You know, if your mind tell you don't do it, if your mind tell you don't date her, if your mind tell you don't date him, if your mind tell you don't marry or whatever the case, if it's in your gut not to do it, you better listen to yourself, listen to your instincts, listen to God, listen to that voice and take heed to it, because if not, it will cause a lot of danger towards the ends. But that's my journey. That's what happened with me and in my life as far as trauma.
That's wonderful. Not wonderful that you had a traumatic.
I'm thankful for it. I'm so thankful for it. I'm thankful for it because the reason why I'm thankful for it because it all the things that we're doing and what our life purpose right now is based on really trying to go back and trying to help young men and feeding communities and things like that. So it's a lot of great things came out of it. So if I can go back and somebody say, you know what, would you want it different? I'd probably say no, because you know the strength that it took to come out of that and everything.
Yeah. I feel the same way. It's funny. And even people say, wouldn't you want to do this differently? Well, no, because then I wouldn't be who I am.
Have the purpose. Yeah.
And I really like who I am. Like even all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
There was something you said that I really wanted to, I know what I wanted to say. You were saying how not everyone has that experience of trusting their gut and it working out. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that, because my abusive relationship, when I met him, I had this voice in my head that said, this is what you need to get to where you're going. You need this relationship to move forward. And as soon as I heard that was like maybe the first couple of weeks we were dating and it was still in that love bombing stage, I forgot about it until the day he left, which was 4 years and 10 months later.
My goodness. Wow.
Sometimes our gut leads us into really dark places. And I hate to be kind of all like, oh, there's a purpose to everything, because
but there is,
you know, that there is. And when you're going through it, it doesn't feel like it. And it's not fair to be like, oh, there's this purpose as to why you're like going through these horrible things every single day. It can feel uncompassionate, I guess, is what. And so I don't want that message to go across so much as just that there is, at the end of it, when you can look back, I can see now.
Absolutely.
That, you know, like I would not have written this book. I would not have gone through all of the things I now have done without that.
Study what you studied, the passion you have, and everything you have to give back to the world, to help
change the lives that you're changing,
to help women. Right. I mean, it's making a big difference in your situation. So I remember when I was young, some of the things I went through. I mean, I had seasons of suicidal. You know, I didn't want my life. And I look at it now and I was like, man, it was all worth it. Dark as it was, bad as it was, painful as it was, it was all worth it, because now even the aspect of the strength I had to pull with the help of her and others that God put a place in my life, I had the strength to come out of that situation in my head. And it took years. I mean, it didn't happen right away, but it took years to do it. But now sitting back and, oh man, it's like, wow, a breath of fresh air. Like, wow, thank you, God. Thank you for those dark times. Thank you for those trials. Thank you for those tribulations, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be who I am today. Yeah.
And I don't know if you find this, but there's this great feeling of like, I did it.
Yes.
Right? Like I got through this, like, oh, I made it through all the levels. Video game or whatever. And I saved the princess.
Yes. Yes.
Right. It's that like feeling of like accomplishment of that we're still here and we're still breathing and loving and all that. So
and you said something about that pleasure deprived. Because of that, it's like it's fulfilled. Every time I do it's fulfilling. It's not fulfilling with social media. My fulfillment is in the purpose that I'm putting my energy into, and it's so rewarding. I mean, it's like I said, it's a breath of fresh air. Even this podcast right here, us having this conversation and releasing this podcast. I mean, someone is going to be helped based on our trauma. Our trauma is going to be a blessing to someone's life, or even someone that's dealing with trauma right now. To say, you know what, they can make it. You know what, I'm going to make it too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Really wonderful work.
Thank you so much. This is really good, man. It's really touched some deep emotions on this podcast, but we're just so thankful. Nischa, if someone wanted to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go? My website is nischaphair.com, and folks can pick up the e-reader version of my book there. The paperback is on Amazon, and I'm on Instagram at Nischa Phair. I'm trying to post more regularly. I don't know. I've been so focused on the book right now that it's hard for me to multitask and switch gears. So I'll be more present there if people are. On behalf of the TMC community, we want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
So we want to thank you for joining us today on TMC. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it changes your life. And if you did, go ahead and subscribe. Click the like button and turn on your notifications so you'll be notified every time we upload a video. And if you're listening on iTunes, go ahead and rate this podcast and leave a review. That helps us get the word out. And we want to invite you to head on over to our leadership podcast, Lead to Greatness, where my husband is interviewing entrepreneurs and great leaders from all around the world every week.
So we want to thank you for joining us today on TMC. Looking forward to hanging out with you again on next week as we continue to help you take your relationship from surviving to thriving. Bye. See you next week.